Good afternoon. We're late in the day, and you notice that we're the Sunshine, Wine, and Wool panel talking about agrivoltaics. I understand Mary Lou said that we're in the way of your wine. Wine from sunshine, but to keep your energy level up, we've got some excavating equipment known as hoes, and you can all go out and rake a few places and put some seed in for either grapes or whatever else that is necessary to get your energy level up for the rest of the evening. I'm Kyle Simpson, and happy to be here for this activity. The panelists that we have here are Alexis Pascaris from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, who will talk about trends in agrivoltaics and agriculture and solar and the combination, some of the data, the science behind it, some of the questions that are being addressed, how to expand it rapidly in an energy transition space. J.R. Howard with Texas Solar Sheep has hands-on experience of managing the lands that the solar installations are on, and the combination with the agriculture, and sees a lot of his business is growing. He'll talk about that, and the opportunities and the challenges. And Blake Mendez is president of a company called CleanCo Energy. The thing I like that he does that is fascinating is putting solar panels in vineyards and making the grapes. The two things go together. So it's sunshine, wine with the vineyards, and wool with the sheep. And I will just say that one of the things that I've been engaged in for the last 3 years, working with the UT Energy Institute with Brian and with Mary Lou at the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation, is creating the Permian Energy Development Laboratory in the Permian Basin in Texas and New Mexico. And we are looking very closely at agrivoltaics applications out there in combination, with renewable natural gas development, enhanced oil recovery and carbon storage, microgrids, and other things, and how these things work together and how they can benefit the communities. So without me taking up any more time, I'm going to ask Alexis to come up and give us a tutorial in agrivoltaics.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. As introduced, my name is Alexis Pascaris. I'm a social scientist at NREL. My research is really focused on how do we minimize the social and environmental impacts of solar through innovative approaches like agrivoltaics. So I'm really interested in community acceptance and how innovative technologies can improve community acceptance of solar, especially in rural areas. So just a quick overview of where I'm headed. I want to talk about these high-level trends in solar and agriculture, in particular here in Texas. I'll give you guys an Agrivoltaics 101, which is, in my opinion, one of the coolest lectures you can sit in all day. And we'll talk about lessons learned across our national research portfolio, and then I kind of want to ground the conversation in agrivoltaics in the Permian, as Kyle introduced. So this isn't news to you all, but we've got some real big renewable energy goals. So I'm showing here an aggressive deployment scenario developed by the Department of Energy. Under this scenario, which is plausible, we'll be reaching up to 400 gigawatts of solar by 2050. 400 gigawatts is going to require about 10 million acres of land, and we're projecting that 90% of those acres will be in rural communities. So the question is, how do we do this? Where does it go? How do we do it right? How do we maximize co-benefits? I wanted to highlight Texas. I just want to demonstrate probably not news to you either. There's a lot of great sunshine here. This is a state rich in solar resources. So the map on the left is showing solar energy potential, and the red is the highest resource. That's great. I also want you to consider the planned and operating solar projects in Texas. The circles are currently operating, and the diamonds are what's to come. And there's a strong pipeline, almost 90 gigawatts is getting ready to be deployed here in Texas. I just want you to get a sense of the spatial distribution and to really demonstrate solar is coming. How do we do this in a way that doesn't compromise other critical land uses? This is growth, this is opportunity, but there's also potential challenges when we talk about land footprint associated with large-scale solar. So Texas is rich in solar energy, but it's also rich in agricultural heritage. #1 state in the country with land use devoted to private working lands. 86% of land in the state is in some form of agricultural production. Leading exporter of agricultural commodities, and I think it's about 1 in 7 Texans are employed in agriculture. So ag is economically and technically really critical, just as much as energy is. So these maps are from a Farms Under Threat report developed by the American Farmland Trust. On the left, you're seeing land use. Dark green is in crop production, light green is in pasture, and the gold is rangeland. So there's a nice diversity of agricultural activity. On the right, I'm demonstrating the conversion of agricultural land since 2001. I won't get into the nitty-gritty of the PVR index, which is productive, versatile, and resilient farmland. I just really want you to focus on the red. The red is land that's been converted from agricultural use. And maybe relative to the rest of the state, it doesn't look like much, but maybe if it's in your backyard, or it's your father's farmland, or your neighbor's farmland, that feels different. So I think what we're here to talk about today is how do we avoid a binary conversion of farmland? We can talk about dual land uses, and that brings us to conversation about solar and how can solar have dual land uses? And that's the motivation behind agrivoltaic. So we have the large-scale deployment of solar, we have potential economic benefits to landowners hosting solar, and then this public opposition to solar on farmland, which is where my research is really focused. But agrivoltaics provides an opportunity to potentially improve the resilience of farmland, boost farm viability. We can talk about keeping agricultural lands in production while we meet our renewable energy goals. It doesn't have to be one or the other. So agrivoltaics, it's a fancy word, but it's fitting. Agriculture plus solar photovoltaics. So I'm talking about active agricultural activity on the same piece of land with solar. And this means crop production, livestock grazing, or pollinator habitat. It can look very different, but it is possible with all types of solar. So what I'm demonstrating here on the top row is traditional utility scale configurations. Low to the ground, close panel spacing, small row spacing. We have crops, grazing, and pollinator habitat. What we're starting to see are novel alternative configurations. So this bottom row, developers are starting to think, how can I design for greater agricultural compatibility? So maybe I'm lifting my panels up, or I'm spacing the rows out, and some are even checkerboarding in between panels to increase the amount of irradiance hitting the ground. Choose your own adventure. There's a lot of, this is a beautiful spectrum. And I won't belabor this slide, I know it's heavy, but I just want you to think in terms of spectrum. Do we want to maximize energy production, or do we want to maximize agricultural compatibility? And we can achieve that through different design changes. We have traditional, low to the ground, close spacing, and as you continue on this spectrum, some developers are even mounting bifacial panels vertically in between the rows, and Blake will talk to us a little bit about that later. So we're studying this. The National Renewable Energy Laboratory is home to the DOE's flagship agrivoltaic program, the INSPIRE program. So in 2016, we received core funding to really coordinate a national portfolio of research. So we have 24 sites across the US doing field-based research, economic research. I'm bringing in the social science agenda. It's a real hands-on effort across all of our disciplines. And we're just trying to improve data and capabilities for the nation. So lots to come here. I just want to flag that agrivoltaics is real and functional, and we've got all types of scientists looking at this from many different directions. We're also tracking agrivoltaics across the US, and we have this awesome map resource if you're really interested. As far as we know, there's almost 500 sites amounting to over 8,000 megawatts of agrivoltaics in the US. And I just wanted to zoom in on Texas and New Mexico to demonstrate, to our knowledge, there's a relatively low coverage of agrivoltaics. And JR is going to talk about the work he's doing because 75% of the sites here in Texas are solar grazed with sheep. So I just want to flag lessons learned across this national effort. So we've got crop production underneath and around solar panels. And we're seeing the greatest success with specialty crops that are either hand harvested or harvested by small machinery. We're also seeing great potential benefits for crops grown in arid regions. So the shade provided by the panels produces a cooler microclimate, and therefore that soil retains more moisture, and those crops demand less water. So if you think about drought every day, you would really appreciate that potential benefit of agrivoltaics. You know, crop response to shade is variable. That's relevant for my friends down in Arizona, but my friends up in Massachusetts actually have too much water. So we're studying those impacts. That's a huge part of our core research portfolio, but what we do know a lot about is cost and design, as I demonstrated. I don't want to steal JR's thunder, so I'll leave the solar integrated grazing piece to him, but I just want to say that at sites that are being solar grazed, we're seeing improved soil conditions, improved carbon and nitrogen in the soil, reduced O&M costs for asset owners, and we're seeing a lot of the solar grazing at the utility scale. It's the most common practice here in the US, whereas if you go over to Europe, livestock grazing is not as popular as active crop production with agrivoltaics. And then we get to ecovoltaics, or pollinator-friendly habitat. So this is native and non-invasive species planted throughout an array. You don't have to change the design in any way. This is a standard practice. It's incredible benefits related to ecosystem services. We're seeing an increase in pollinators, a diversity of pollinators, so there's different and more, and then reduced soil erosion, and all these valuable co-benefits that come with retaining native vegetation. So we're pulling together all of these lessons learned across disciplines, and NREL has developed what we call our 5 C's framework of agrivoltaic success. So if you align climatic conditions with the right solar configuration in the crops, and you make sure that system is compatible with farming activity, and you have the right partners, like we just talked about in our earlier panel, this is what we consider key considerations or key components of successful agrivoltaic projects. And I just want us to start thinking about what do these success factors mean in the grounded case study of Texas. Before I talk about a Texas relevant opportunity, I just want to kind of pull lessons learned from everything I just talked about and to say a lot of good work has been done in agrivoltaics, but there's still a lot more to be done. I want to see broader proof of concept across all geographies, testing all different types of crops and configurations and scales. We need innovation in construction management. Specifically, how do you manage soil when the solar site is being constructed and making sure it's not compacted to a point where roots can't penetrate. Lots of considerations around that. We also need greater workforce development and farmers willing to farm in an obstacle course. So I want to just highlight, Kyle brought up PEDL, the Permian Energy Development Laboratory. I'm just going to speak to one core project. So PEDL, high level, is a community-based research organization. It's a 2-state consortium. We've got Texas, New Mexico, actors like NREL and Sandia National Labs, UT Austin, New Mexico Tech, New Mexico State, Midland College. It's a really impressive group of people coming together to improve or deliver greater innovation for the energy transition, especially in the Permian. And one of our core research projects is an agrivoltaics demonstration. So we've got 320 acres for full-scale demonstration of advanced energy technology. 10 of those acres are dedicated to agrivoltaic demonstration. And our goal really is to conduct feasibility assessment and demonstrate technical, social, and economic viability of agrivoltaics in this region. That can look like cattle. That could look like locally relevant crop production. There's a lot of potential here. So my last point, and this is my plug, we're looking for interested partners and we're looking for experts who want to serve on a working group to help drive the mission of this project. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, JR. I take you can hear me, which is good. I'll use this. Okay. This works. Thank you very much. Blake Mendez with CleanCo Energy. We help farmers harvest the sun twice, as you've heard, through photosynthesis and photovoltaics. So ultimately, at the end of the day, we're talking to the farmers in a very similar language and a very similar conceptual process that they're already accustomed to. So with the overcanopy of solar, for instance, in the vineyard market, we cater specifically to the vineyards in the high plains of Texas. The Llano Estacado produces 80% of our state's grapes. The vast majority of the grapes are consumed down in the Texas Triangle, which is great. And the Texas Triangle also has the Hill Country's American Viticultural Area, which if you look at it, area and pound for pound, I know it's not up here, but in the AVA world, your Texas High Plains and your Hill Country AVAs are very comparable. Most of the folks that grow out in Meadow, Texas, Meadow is probably not an area, little village you've heard of. It's outside of Brownfield, Texas. I know Brownfield is probably not what you've heard of. You might have heard of Lubbock, and that's good. That's a good start, I know, with the rivalry academically and also physically with sports. I went to Tulane, so I don't really have a dog in that fight. But at least I grew up in Midland, and I know that what's going on in the market, specifically with ultimately the vast resources of oil and gas that we've developed, and I know that the university system has benefited from the university lands. And how are we leveraging that? Because most folks, most of the farmers that I'm talking with, they understand royalties. They understand oil and gas royalties. So ultimately, at the end of the day, you want to punch a hole in a BLM land at 16.67 cents of every single dollar. In some places in Midland County, some of the richest wells that have been pumping for the last 80 years is 25 cents on every dollar. Okay, well, keep that in mind, because when we stack that against what a solar lease is paying, it's only paying on surface rights. Yeah, you could say, okay, well, there's not this developed system of cash flows attached to that. But what we work with our vineyard owners and negotiate for is, how are we looking at these ancillary services from all of this power that's being created and distributed into the system? Yes, we're not necessarily looking at transmission, and we're going underneath at the distribution level, so everything under 115,000 volts in the system, negotiating directly to the electric co-op, the distribution, and that's the value that we provide. not only to our vineyard owners, but also to our clients as well in the project management and the EPC world, and helping folks navigate that. Because at the end of the day, is how are the agrivoltaic systems benefiting the producers? Number one, what's the shade doing for them? How's the frost protection, as well as the hail protection? And at the end of the day, also the sweetener, that lagniappe on that is your cash flow. But at the end of the day, what the producers are more concerned about is what's the end effect on my grape? What's the end effect on my sheep? And we very much look forward to continuing to engage in the market and provide value. So thanks very much.
J.R. Howard with Texas Solar Sheep. We own it's really a vegetation management company for large utility scale solar in Texas. We've got some new projects coming in Oklahoma and Arkansas to expand out a little bit. But, these solar sites have to keep vegetation under the leading edge of these panels for really two main reasons. One is shading the panels on production, and the other is to prevent large fires like we've seen, which is driven by the insurance industry. So there's reasons why they have to keep that vegetation below certain levels. Typically in the past, they have taken traditional mowing services and just mowed that and kept mowing it, which is very expensive when you start thinking about most of these sites in Texas now are 1,300 acres and up. 1,200 acres is really a small site anymore. And a lot of these narrow rows above ground cab lines are mowed with zero-turn mowers. So I don't know if anybody's tried to mow 1,200 acres with zero-turn mowers and weed eaters, but it's a big project. It's very expensive. It can cost several $100s an acre a year to mow. So we've gone to a process of grazing sheep on these sites in exchange for traditional mowing. Just to give you an idea kind of how that scaled, we've been doing it 3 years now, and we started with 300 sheep of our own that we owned, and now we're around 6,000 across about 19,000 acres of solar, mostly up and down I-35, kind of east side of I-35 is kind of our core area. We have another 2,500 or so sheep contracted out with cooperating producers, where we've got some young producers we're trying to get involved as well and helping them get started. We're proud of that. And another thing we're kind of proud of is we've got 3 large utility scale sites this year that we're doing consulting work on, where the landowners are actually going to be able to graze their own sheep on a project where they're getting the panels and the grazing contract. So those have been fun to work with. We do work on a lot of areas where the landowners really don't have any interest, or they're kind of absentee and don't have much interest in sheep, or get the solar deal because they're getting out of farming or one reason or another. So it's scaled up really good. We like I said, we just started out with sheep. We've actually gone to now we're actually baling hay, cutting hay, baling hay on sites. We cut around 600 round bales last year. We're going to increase that number this year, and then we also started doing no-till seeding last fall, and we're going to do another round of that this spring. So we've kind of used the sheep as an entry into agriculture with solar. Once they really got comfortable with that, we've been able to introduce other services as far as or pieces of agriculture on a dual land use scenario of cutting hay and now no-till crop scenario. So I think there's a lot we can do going forward. There's some site design issues with some of the true farm practices at large scale that there's some hurdles to overcome there. The sheep are really the easiest to introduce to these sites with very little to no site modification, so that's why it's been so easy to get them in. And some people will gripe at me about the sheep being too easy because we've made it too easy for them to go that route and not probably look at other avenues. But I think it has made a lot of folks more comfortable with ag being on solar at the same time. One thing we do focus on is we use local full-time personnel at our sites. They're operated as individual ranches, if you want to call them that. A lot of these sites, a lot of the very big sites, we actually have more for full-time personnel on the site than the asset owner, the O&M company taking care of the site. So we actually hire more local folks than they even have taking care of the panels. on several of our really big sites. So that's a big focus of ours is to hire local. We spend our money local, and I think it's been a big benefit in some of those areas that these big projects are in. There's a lot of money staying local. So that's kind of where we're at. I know we're gonna have a little Q&A, so I won't talk too long. I don't want to take up too much time, but appreciate you having me.
So we've talked about the opportunity and the relative new nature of this from the Department of Energy. Years ago, when I was at the Department of Energy, we studied oil and gas, solar, some. Wind was growing. We had coal. We had nuclear. We did not have agrivoltaics. And we did not look a lot at how these systems can integrate across each other. How could you integrate agriculture and renewable energy, solar energy? How could you? What can happen at the big scale, at the utility scale? What happens at the smaller scale? And all across Texas, you've got a tremendous amount, and you saw the maps that Alexis put up, of land that is available to be used. There's a whole lot of land that is not used really for annual farming operations anymore. And there are a lot of people that would like to get back out into the business of farming and get closer to the land. Well, how do you all see? What do you all see as the big opportunities for growth in the space? Is it smaller scale projects? Or is it the big scale projects? Is it pretty much spread across the state? Or do you have any thoughts in that regard?
Do you want to hit it?
Yeah, then I'll hand it off to you. I think it really depends on the agricultural application. So if we're thinking about grazing, yes, at the large scale, very economically viable and just relevant to the operation. I think we're seeing crop-based agrivoltaics make most economic and technical sense at the community solar scale. So 1 to 5 megawatts, something that can be hand harvested and directly embedded into that community. So there's like a full circular economy, if you will, of the food that's being produced, places that it's going, and that active personnel on site. If you really sit down and start to pencil out and try to think about managing crops within a utility scale array, we're getting into a lot of questions around water usage, the challenges start to compound at that scale. And I think that's okay. I think what we're doing across our portfolio is really narrowing on, okay, when does it make sense and why? And these are places we should go and places we shouldn't. And I'd want to hear about like spatial distribution opportunities like relevant to Texas, if you have any insight on that.
Do you have any thoughts, Jared, before?
Yeah, I think in Texas right now what we're seeing is a very high percentage of what we're seeing is all utility scale construction anyway. So there's not a lot of community size projects being built. So, a lot of the focus is on utility scale because that's mostly what's out there. But I would say there is a huge opportunity for anybody to get into the ag space that does not have access to land because, traditionally for us, we're not a big landowner and used leased land. And, we traditionally had 200 to 300 ewes, and here we are able to run several thousand on property we don't own and make a business out of it. So, and I've got a couple cooperating producers that have gone from 70, 80 ewes to 600, 700 on solar that they never would have had that opportunity. So there is a huge opportunity for new farmers or folks with very limited access to land to access some of this.
Yeah, definitely. With a lot of the constraints that are in the distributed energy level, which at the end of the day, when we look at planning of load and planning of actual usage of the load, it makes a very difficult case against a lot of transmission budgets, although when you look at transmission investment, utility scale, solar investment, it's available. The power purchase agreements have incredibly been seasoned. Getting into the community aspect of it, the community solar, where, for instance, Jack's Solar Garden in Longmont, Colorado, which has been a hallmark asset to the NREL database, but beyond the numbers of it all, that's where you see the true community involvement of folks that otherwise haven't been in ag, that are touched by sticking their hands in the soil, really getting to the fact of the matter of where their food comes from. Because there's a deep interest in many of us. We want to know where our food comes from. We want to know, is this power source going to suffocate us? Or is this going to drain our water resources? But at the end of the day, when you look at an asset combination, the co-location of these resources, and whether it's a vertical bifacial panel, I know the vineyard owner that we're working with right now, the Bingham Family Vineyards, he drives me around, and we get to see within his own farm where he wants to put things and what he wants it to look like, and how is he going to drive his harvesting equipment through these chutes, because that 80%, the vast majority of that is all mechanically harvested. So where's that opportunity to meet? So you've got, on the legal contract side, a number of different variations that can be made to the power purchase agreement. Now, is it bankable? Well, that's part of the discussion, because there are funders, foundations, investors that are specifically looking for social and environmental returns that are comparable with their financial returns. And they're out there. It's just providing the story and building that community network, that threshold of getting from ideation to actual live action, and then ultimately where you begin having traction and you're able to hire folks and provide opportunities. So that's ultimately where it's going. It's just getting all the bits and pieces and taking the parts from transmission, taking the parts from big ag, taking the parts from what works to what will work. Because it will work. It's just that, how are we going to do it?
So access to capital in a lot of cases is a real question.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, with the Inflation Reduction Act and the credits for solar, new solar installations and what have you, it's created a lot of interest for tax equity investment, where you've got people, you hit it a little bit there. You've got some high wealth individuals around the country that would like to get into this, and they need tax shelters. Are you seeing much growth in the business, or people seeking out those opportunities, working with the farmers and the local communities to make those things become a reality?
Yes and no. Yes, because substantially, ultimately, you do have to provide the community benefits for what you're applying for with the IRS. For instance, I was on a call earlier with the Albuquerque Public School Water and Energy Commission, specifically looking at their assets of where are we going to get some of our low-income funding sources. But that window's shut. So the vast majority of the IRA money that is available, a lot of that oxygen's already getting sucked out of the room by much larger players it's ultimately benefiting the utility scale. There is some trickle down to the community, but for most communities to have the programming runway to be able to address the grant applications and have the sophistication and budget to do so, they're priced out of it, but also that's a lack of cohesion in a cooperative sense. Because we've noticed that farmers co-ops, ag credit co-ops, farmers understand the cooperative system because it works, and it works in a community basis. So leveraging these community resources and funding to match with, say, a family office that may have the appetite to take on an agrivoltaic array, as well as an adjoining philanthropy that can provide support for that, that's key. And that's how it's done.
So do you see that as an opportunity for growth?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that gets me excited, because there are folks in the room that are genuinely looking at a community investment.
One of the things that we're looking at with the PEDL project out it's in Yoakum County is where this 320 acres is trying to create a system that can be repeated, replicated in different places to help strengthen the grid, strengthen the local distribution systems, where a lot of the rural communities are out more on the edge of the electric systems and don't enjoy the robust benefit of all the power moving through in the central part of it. So we're thinking about that. And Blake and I have talked about this a bit about the opportunities in West Texas to strengthen the grid out there and the availability of electricity, combining the agriculture piece with it. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, you bet. During time with Excel up in Amarillo, I don't know if anyone knows, but at Abernathy is another one of the little Texas towns, but the Southwest Power Pool and ERCOT ride along this line, and at that station, you've got Elk Station as well as Mustang Station, which is owned by Golden Spread, and Excel has the infrastructure around it. So at that level and at that site at Abernathy, Golden Spread has the ability to trade between both markets. Most people don't know that, now you do. And beyond that as well, the transmission and distribution substations are some of the most valuable substations because of the interoperability, interactiveness between the two systems. It doesn't happen a lot. That said, though, with the proper processing and understanding within the NERC system, and granted, staying away from bulk electric system helps, but ultimately a lot of it does interconnect. And with the New Mexico Permian Basin, around Eddy County and Artesia, which is a heavy oil and gas area, it's almost like, it's much more sophisticated than this, but it's almost like going into your grandfather's room and you got all these wires running across, and it all makes sense ultimately when you piece it off, but there's so much interconnectedness that when we look at upgrades and utilities going from 69 kV systems to 115 kV systems, within this, how do we not only, yes, we're going to upgrade the transmission, but how do we couple that into the distribution? And that's also electric co-ops and the constituencies in that advocating for that. But they've got to know about it, and that's ultimately why we're all here is to provide that, because there are 53-something million Americans that are serviced by rural electric co-ops.
So, and then one of the things that if you followed some of the demand for electricity to electrify the country, to make the energy transmission is enormous. And Alexis was talking about some of that. And there have been a number of major, some people call them flyover transmission line propositions to bring from rich areas, rich in wind, to bring the wind power to other states, going maybe from west to east and just passing over a lot of land in the middle of it. And that raises questions from a public policy perspective and from a community perspective. And it seems that it's a question is, if one developed a number of these agrivoltaics applications, would the big utilities and the big transmission entities begin to pay attention to that as a way to help distribute and strengthen their systems without just passing over necessarily?
What do you think about that?
I don't have a lot of experience with that. Those big transmission lines, I think to get a lot of that approved, they're having to get some of that access through those communities they're going through, but I don't know a lot about the transmission part, so y'all may be able to answer that better than I do.
I know one of the ranchers that I knew about 10 years ago in Midland, he had some transmission lines that were put on his property, and he was ostensibly a powerful man, and he was not able to stop it through the Texas Public Utility Commission, and he didn't altogether like it. I know when I was in the planning room in Excel that there are these maps that are provided to the PUC, and it can be incredibly invasive for the landowners.
Are there questions from the audience? I'm getting mine satisfied. I'm curious now.
I've got a question real quick. So if you have the sheep on the land, does it keep the ag exemption?
Currently, it doesn't. There are some things going through committee and some other things now at the state level to try to provide some type of incentive for doing some dual land use program, and that's really what I think we need to push, because currently they're losing that ag exemption, and the solar companies having to pick up the tab on that on the tax bill. So I hope instead of being I'm not big on the government telling us how to do everything, so I hope we can get to an incentive for dual land use versus just going directly to some areas have gone to some counties and states up north have gone to basically putting it in law that they have to do a dual land use program. But I think on the tax side is where the incentive is to keep that ag use evaluation if we do an approved dual land use scenario.
Okay. Next question was, who pays who? So do they pay you to get rid of the grass, or do you pay them to be able to graze your sheep?
No, they pay us for the service. So we're most of our contracts, initially we got a couple contracts that were sheep only, but really in the last 2.5 years, all those contracts are a full service vegetation management. The sheep can't do all of it. So we probably do 70–80% of the work with sheep, but we go in and mow or spray, whatever we have to do to control the rest of that balance. So we're paid a per acre rate just to control that on a year-round basis.
Any questions?
Thanks. I actually used to work for Golden Spread, so I know exactly the Antelope Elk Energy Center.
All right.
But this question's actually for Alexis. So you said that in your scenario, it was more for community solar or small-scale projects. So kind of what's the scalability of that? That's sort of a specialized level of agriculture, and the land use for that isn't really what you see in like the mass food economy. And so, you know, if we need so much additional land utilization to get to zero emissions, you know, what's the potential scope for this in terms of what it can do to contribute to that, or like a max?
Yeah, it's a good question. I will caveat this whole conversation with agrivoltaics is one piece of the puzzle, right? Solar build-out's is gonna continue, but when there's conflict with farmland or opportunity with farmland, that's where the agrivoltaic component comes in. So I think solar will scale with or without agrivoltaics, but I want to see a world in which it does meaningfully scale with agriculture. I will also share with you unpublished results from our partners at the University of Illinois who are testing the viability of solar with commodity crops like soy, wheat, and the big ones that you think of when you think of the Midwest. Not economically viable. And if it was, then we would see a whole transformation of the Midwest. But to the point about scalability, I really think all results are good results because they're telling us our boundaries and they're telling us where to go. So if we can't do lettuce at the utility scale in an array, that's fine. Let's just produce power. I hope that's getting to your question, but just thinking about like, it doesn't have to be all or nothing with agrivoltaics. Before joining the laboratory, I was independently consulting on agrivoltaics, and a lot of people were calling me like, hey, we've got 1,000 megawatts, and I want to do some sort of agricultural production. So they're carving out like this pasture or this set acreage just for agriculture. It's not the whole array, but it's something, and it's a start. And I think what we're learning right now at the pilot scale, which is all of the projects you saw on my map are pilot projects, right? Going from pilot scale to commercial and beyond there's a lot of learning curves, and it's a lot of the work that we're doing right now.
Do you think some of that's just setting of continental U.S. versus the islands? So I know agrivoltaics, specifically kind of what you're talking about, is really being considered in Puerto Rico and is actually reaching commercial viability to some extent?
Interesting you speak to Puerto Rico. I was just there, and So the Department of Energy funded a project called PR100. Dozens of amazing scientists working to figure out how does Puerto Rico or other island nations get to 100% renewable energy with such intense spatial constraints. There's a really strong community sentiment against solar on farmland. People would rather eat dinner than have electricity. So when we're talking, so Puerto Rico can reach 100%. That's going to include a lot of rooftop solar, but it also is going to include land-intensive solar. So I don't know, to your point, I would say I see a lot of great potential for agrivoltaics for island nations and space-constrained places that are also dealing with food security. Like, we just published a project where we were thinking about technical feasibility of agrivoltaics in Haiti, just released yesterday. So we're really thinking about this. Like, we're seeing such motion and movement for agrivoltaics in places like Europe that are so space constrained. And then everyone's looking at the US like, why are you so behind? And it's like, we got land. We're not worried about it, but we need to start thinking about it and getting ahead of the curve. So it's a nascent industry, but it's been evolving so rapidly in the past 5 years.
Hi, thank you all for being here. My question is for JR. So I know your business is Texas Solar Sheep. Why do sheep work well? Do you see your business ever expanding to other animals that graze, like cattle or goats or horses? If you could speak to that, please.
Sure. The sheep work the best right now with the current site designs, just because there's really no site design change needed for the way they're building them. When you go to larger animals, I know a lot of y'all may not have been on the solar, but those panels are flimsy, the wiring, I mean, everything is easily damaged. I mean, you could have some sheep being chased by some stray dogs or something, they can actually damage some panels. That's how easy it is to panel. So if you put a bunch of cattle in there on those low panels, just rubbing on them, they're gonna cause damage. So, you know, to get cattle, I think you're gonna have to get the torque tubes about 8 feet tall, which is probably almost 4 feet higher than they are now. So I've been told by engineering that would be probably double the steel cost on a project. So at very large scale, if we're going to see that, I think it's going to be maybe driven in the tax area. But right now, just the current site design, we can put sheep just about on any site that I've seen without site modification or having to have any, you know, anything done for us to be there. So that's what the asset owner, a lot of times, especially before we got real good buy-in, they wanted whatever was easiest. And a lot of times that was, hey, I'm going to call the mowing crew. They come mow, they're done in 3 weeks, and nobody is out here. But we've kind of slowly seen it evolve away from that to more ag uses, and now we're. But to answer your question, it's just easier for the sheep. I mean, we can put those in on any side I've seen so far and not have any additional considerations.
Okay. We have one more question here.
This one's going to JR as well. Hey, JR, you had mentioned the no-till crops. Could you mention like some of the what those crops are and the advantages of each?
Sure. We just started that program last fall. We planted, I think it was in the neighborhood of around 1,500 acres of no-till wheat, really all for sheep graze out over the winter. So this spring we're going to plant, I haven't got that plan exactly done yet, but somewhere in the neighborhood of probably 300 acres to 400 acres of millet that we're going to bale for sheep and other animals. You know, we do sell some outside hay to cattle folks and other folks like that. So that was the easiest way for us to get in. I think there are some ways I've seen on these site designs where we can probably get further into actually some type of harvestable crop. You know, it could be wheat, it could be millet, it could be any of those, but at the moment, we're doing that, but we're still using it for livestock uses at the moment. But there's no reason we can't be doing the same thing for some type of harvestable crop or you know, at larger scale too. So.
One more question. Maybe Blake could understand. So when you have subsurface mineral rights severed from the surface, how do you all coordinate or get the right rights to be able to do the solar on the surface, but yet still meet the requirements for access for someone who owns the subsurface mineral rights? And how does this play into the agrivoltaics?
In the case of PEDL, this is an opportunity to sort through that. Ultimately, in the end of the day, this is part of that due diligence to bring the project to bear, understanding who are the subsurface mineral owners, they've got to be 100% on board with it before moving forward with the solar. So if there's not any agreement when it comes to that, that is a deal killer in finding a new site. But yeah, that's ultimately site by site, and in West Texas, where you do have, and in Permian Basin, New Mexico, you do have a number of different sites that are fractionalized among some of the wells, like in Howard County, for instance, which is Big Spring, have been pulling for the last 80 years, and they've been fractionalized and just split it equally between our 8 kids, and 8 kids have maybe 2 or 3 kids each, and the next thing you know, you've got 35 people to contact for one piece of land. That takes intense coordination with the landowner to truly understand who owns that, because ultimately, at the end of the day, with the conflict, that is a project, an asset killer for both parties, really, at the end of the day.
Well, we ran over such an interesting topic. Thank you all so much for an interesting set of conversations and sharing your insight.
Thanks for coming.
Nice job, yeah.
Thank you. That was fun.
It was. That's all you.
Thanks